Welcome, friends, to Beyond the Crucible, the podcast that dares to talk about setback and failure, but not so we can commiserate. It is so we can elevate. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show, and our mission today, as it is every week, is to offer you the hope that your crucible experiences, those trials and tragedies and challenges that you faced in the past or are facing right now, they don't define you. They refine you. They did not happen to you. They happened for you. And I don't know many people, heck, I don't know anybody who knows that better than the founder of Beyond the Crucible, the host of the show, and my friend, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, we have another episode that is rooted in your latest blog. And this is going to be a timely and very informative and we hope very helpful conversation, I think.
Yeah, Gary, I think it really will be. And it's something I actually have strong views on, ironically.
Yes. Well, and those are always the best episode, folks. When Warwick has strong perspective, strong views, strong feelings about a subject, that's when some of our best thought leadership from Warwick comes out. So I mean it when I say I'm looking forward to this episode. And this episode is another one of the episodes that we do where Warwick and I discuss his most recent blog at beyondthecrucible.com. This particular blog that we're going to discuss today is called Focus on Winning a Friend Rather Than an Argument. What does that mean? You'll find out as we begin to move forward. And the first hint of what we're going to discover here is I'm just going to ask Warwick straight up. What led you, Warwick, to write this blog titled, as I said, Focus on Winning a Friend Rather Than Winning an Argument? And particularly, there's a timing aspect to this as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. What led me to write this blog about focus on winning a friend, not winning an argument, is that we live in very divided times. Certainly in the U.S., there's an election on November 5th, and the whole election season has been very divisive. You've got both campaigns, both candidates hurling invective at each other, and it just, if anything, the rhetoric seems to get more heated, not less. So that's kind of one aspect, and not only are the candidates and the campaigns kind of going at each other, which, yeah, it does happen, it feels like it's polarizing the country into different sections. Some feel passionately about one candidate, others feel passionately about another. And it almost seems like this division has become very personal. And more than just the U.S., you look at what's happening around the world, around the globe. You've got divisions on how to handle the war in Ukraine. There's also a lot of strong feelings about the Middle East and what's happened in Israel and how to move forward and bring peace. Whether you're talking globally or in the U.S., there's just very strong feelings, just huge divisions. And so differences of opinion on the major issues of our day, whether it's in the U.S. or around the world, they're understandable. But it feels like it's a lot further. It feels like people are disagreeing with each other, and they're not just saying, I disagree with you. They almost feel like anybody that holds an opposing viewpoint is the enemy. They are reprehensible, almost less than human. How could you support that candidate? How could you support that particular perspective? Any right-thinking human could not possibly believe in that perspective or support that candidate or have that point of view. It's become very, very personal. So, I think it's fine to have strongly held opinions, but we should avoid demonizing other people and really questioning their motive or their intent. We don't know who they are, their story. And so just this notion that we don't just disagree with others, we demonize them, we almost feel they're evil, we're angry at them, we don't want to talk to them. It's just taking strong opinions to a level that's incredibly damaging for our society and our world, and certainly doesn't lead to any kind of harmony or, hey, how can we find things we agree on? It's like, find things we agree on with somebody that's evil and reprehensible. I'm not talking about candidates. Right. I'm just talking about regular people. your
Right.
neighbors, your friends, your coworkers. It's like, I don't need to have a discussion with somebody who's evil. I guess I have to work with them. They're part of my family, but I don't have to talk to them. I don't like talking to awful, evil people. I just want to avoid them. I mean, it just gets
Right.
crazy, but we're in this crazy situation.
Now, it's important to note, folks, that Warwick said there, we have an election coming up on November 5th. Frank, when you hear this episode, when this episode goes live, it will be after the election. So the election will have passed. But what we've done here so that we can really lean into this topic is we've recorded this a few days before the election. So what we're talking about here, and frankly, we both realize that all the things that Warwick just said after the election aren't going to be all of a sudden, poof, they're gone, right? These are kind of things that will carry on in our culture, sadly, unless we do some things to change it. And that's one of the things that we're focusing on here with this episode is how do we change that? Because what Warwick just described, right? We are, after all, beyond the crucible. We talk about overcoming crucible moments and in many cases, how you can avoid them. And one of the ways you can avoid crucibles is by exactly what Warwick said, interacting with people in a way that doesn't cause dissonance, cause distance, cause arguments, cause friction, cause problems, cause unfriending. All of those kinds of things, everything I just mentioned is a crucible. So the reason why we're talking about it here at Beyond the Crucible, why Warwick wrote the blog for Beyond the Crucible, is because all that stuff that he was just talking about, what we're going to cover here are things that can cause crucibles in our lives. And we're hoping to give you some tactics to avoid that.
You know what, Gary, what you just said is so important. I want listeners and viewers to really listen to that, is that, if we start demonizing other people, our friends, coworkers, family, life is hard enough. The crucibles that will happen to us, they can be unavoidable. Death of a loved one. I mean, we have had all sorts of crucibles, situations on our podcast from people who've been abused, as I said, physical challenges, loss of businesses. It's something else when we create the crucible. I don't mean to be sarcastic, but we here at Beyond the Crucible don't think it's helpful to make crucibles when you don't need to. I mean, why would you do that? And so by demonizing family members, co-workers, friends, you're creating division crucibles that could have considerable harmful effects on them and on you. So those are crucibles that, it won't just hurt the other person, it will hurt you. It just doesn't make any sense. By all means, have a disagreement, but don't create pain and crucibles needlessly. And that's
right.
What demonizing other people does. It's just, it's almost like, getting a 2x4 and hammering yourself over the head. Why do that?
Right.
I mean, it just makes, or on somebody else. I mean, why? It makes no sense. So we just don't think it makes any degree of sense to create crucibles needlessly.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point, Warwick. And before we get into, as we always do on your blog episodes, the details of your blog, there's something else in your blog that you write about, someone who modeled for you exactly what we're talking about here, how to disagree agreeably, you might say. And that's your father. So talk a little bit about what you learned from your dad about this very subject that we're talking about here.
My dad, Warwick Fairfax, he had the same name as me, except he was knighted. I wasn't. But they don't really hand out knighthoods these days in Australia, and I wouldn't have deserved it the way my father did. But my dad, he was a model of somebody that could have constructive conversations with people that he disagreed with. He was somebody that really enjoyed engaging with people of differing perspective because he was curious. He loved to learn. He loved to dialogue. And he was somebody that was a very intellectually curious person. And one of the things in particular that he enjoyed was dialoguing with people about politics. He was, after all, for, 40 plus years, managing director or chairman of John Fairfax Limited, which was the 150-year-old family media company that my family had. So he was at the center of politics and history for most of his life. So of course he's going to be interested in politics and had opinions. You want to have conversations with leaders about the major subjects of the day affecting Australia and, indeed the world. So one example of this, of his ability to engage with people of differing opinions, is that he was good friends with a man by the name of Bob Hawke. Now, Bob Hawke went on to become the longest-serving Labour Prime Minister in Australia's history. So the Labour Party, as you might imagine, was left of centre. And at the time my father knew him in the 1970s in particular, this was before Bob Hawke became the Labour Party Prime Minister. He was at the time the head of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, ACTU, which is kind of like the AFL-CIO in the US, the main trade unions. And at the time, Bob Hawke's opinions were left of centre. Now, my father, his views were somewhat more right of centre. So if you went down the major issues of the day, there's probably a lot that they didn't agree on. So what's interesting is that both my father and Bob Hawke, they were highly intelligent. They both were Oxford University graduates. And despite their political differences and their different philosophies, they had deep respect for each other and would get together from time to time just to talk about the major issues of the day. Again, my father had this attitude that Bob Hawke might have different views than him. He might strongly disagree with those views, but he respected Bob Hawke as a man, as a human. He was somebody that was highly intelligent, and he went on to have a major impact in the nation of Australia. As somebody who is intellectually curious, why wouldn't you want to have a conversation with Bob Hawke? He was a man of stature, a man of intelligence, who was having and would have a major impact in the nation of Australia. Why wouldn't you want to talk to that person? The question wasn't whether they agreed or not. It's just interesting because as you have conversations with people like that, maybe you'll learn something from them. Maybe they'll teach you some things. Maybe it will sharpen and reinforce your own perspective. There are a variety of outcomes that can happen from constructive dialogue. But if you're my father, head of this major media company in Australia, a newspaper company, why wouldn't you want to have discussions with Bob Hawke? And the issue wasn't so much to win one person over to their points of view. It was more just to have a constructive dialogue and learn from each other.
Right.
So it really, to me, was a role model of have strong opinions by all means, but don't demonize other people and have constructive conversations with people. It was just something that's remarkable, especially as I reflect on it a few decades later. It's remarkable because it's increasingly so unusual, that model of my father. It seems like it's a species of person or a type or a way of thinking that's almost extinct, that has died out, which I feel extremely sad about. Yeah.
And, it's interesting, and we're going to get into the points you make in the blog, but what we're describing here is as the problem is this us versus them mentality, right? And here's an organizing construct, folks, to sort of think about as we go through this. When it's us versus them, guess what? Sometimes we are somebody's them. In fact, whenever there's a disagreement, we're always somebody's them. So what we're urging you to do here as you treat the other person who with whom you find it difficult to engage, with someone whose opinion is different than yours, remember that you're also someone whose opinions are different than somebody else's. And what we hope happens here is that through these examples, these techniques that Warwick will talk about, it will not only help us to interact with others better, but it will help us realize when people are interacting with us, just why that might be, and how we can sort of correct those things as well. So always remember when we're talking about us versus them, and if we're going to make somebody else evil and horrible and terrible, and how can you believe that? Guess what? Those who believe those things that we don't believe could likely think the same things of us. So what we're trying to do here is make a kinder, gentler nation, I think, is what we're trying to get at. Any reaction to that, Warwick, or shall we dive in?
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. I mean, it's such a great point, us versus them. If we can get away from an us versus them way of looking at life, I think we will have a better society. We'll have a society that will be more harmonious, more willing to come across the aisle in the Senate, House of Representatives, whatever legislative body is in your country. We'll have people that are willing to find common ground, stick to their principles, but okay, how can we find ways to agree? So if we have less of us versus them, less of somebody who disagrees with me is evil, we'll get more done and be a more harmonious, and I'd like to think a more just society. So these issue of not demonizing the other, somebody who has different opinions, is just so important for the well-being of our nation and the well-being for our society and, frankly, the well-being of the world. This is one of the most important subjects I think there is to discuss.
Very true. So let's get into discussing the details. As we do with all of our blog discussion episodes, you have extracted some thoughts, some insights and action steps listeners and viewers can take to focus more on winning friends than on winning arguments when dealing with differences in opinion with others. So let's run through those points. This surprises no one, that there are 7 points in this blog. If you've listened to any of these, if you've read any of Warwick's blog, he just loves 7 points, which is good. That gives us robust ground to have discussion. And the first one of those points, Warwick, is don't judge the motives of people we disagree with. Talk about that a little bit.
This is really the first point, maybe one of the most fundamental. Just because we disagree with somebody, don't assume that they're evil. Don't assume that they're unintelligent, misguided, uninformed, that any evolved, enlightened human being must agree with us. If they disagree with us, they may be morons with rocks in their head that have been mesmerized by some delusional leader. It's
Right.
always possible, but don't make the assumption that they're idiots who are following some moron. Whichever way you look at politics or any issue in life, give people the benefit of the doubt. We all have different histories and, different ways of looking at life. So that's really the first point is don't leap to judging the motives of other people. Don't assume, the reason they believe that is, there's some ulterior motive and, all these bad things that we can think about people, that somehow there must be some significant character flaw for them to believe what they're believing. Intelligent people can't possibly believe that. Therefore, there's something seriously wrong with them. What are they doing out in free society? They're a menace. You can really get so spun up. You can have these just crazy thoughts. It really starts with, you don't know what's in their soul. Don't judge the motives of other people just because we strongly disagree with them. It's fine to have strong opinions, but don't judge other people.
Right. And it's true. And I'll use an example from my own life. My best friend, if you lined up, here are 15 positions on politics and on life and on religion we would disagree on all 15 of them. But we've been best friends since college, and that was since 1985 we met. And we have a relationship. You can have, not only can you not think of them as evil, you can have friendships and relationships with folks if you focus on things other than those things that you disagree on and that you disagree with. So my friend and I, with whom I write film study books, we've written 3 of them so far, and we've got another one going right now and a contract for one after that. We just simply don't talk about some of these issues. We talk about the things that we have absolutely in common, and that's movies and the kind of movies we like and the stars we like. Yeah, we'll disagree about some things, but those things that can really fracture relationships if you take them too seriously, if you make them about winning all the time, we just avoid those things. And that is possible to do when you're dealing with differences of opinion. Your father did that in his relationship with Mr. Hawk when he was going through, right? He had a friendship, even though they couldn't have disagreed more. That is something that we can have. So it's not simply avoiding the negative here. I think what we're trying to exhort people to, you can achieve a positive. You can create friendships despite differences.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Gary. I'm all for having constructive dialogue with people who have different opinions than me. But I think what you're highlighting, Gary, is if you have a friendship relationship with this person, they could be a family member, a friend, a coworker, you don't have to talk about the subject that will both get your blood pressures boiling. It's okay to avoid it. Doesn't mean that you're avoiding them. It's just, it's not always profitable. I mean, it depends on the person and the individual. It's not always profitable to have this big argument or even constructive dialogue with somebody all the time, because your relationship should be more than just the discussion of a particular set of issues. There should be an underlying friendship with that person. So it's such a good point. You don't always have to talk about the subject. You can talk about other things. And you might find there's lots of things that you enjoy together, whether it's sports, the arts, hiking, fishing, music. There's all sorts of subjects that you might find you have in common. So don't always go to the subject that will, light a forest fire. It's okay to not want to burn the house down or the forest down and just talk about other things. That can be a smart move. It often is the smart move.
Right. And save that little bit of wisdom, folks. Put it on a loop. So, because the holidays are coming up, Thanksgiving and Christmas are coming up. That's good counsel that Warwick just gave when you're sitting around the house celebrating the holidays with your family, because that can be a time where friction can come up. So remember Warwick's words. Play them again when those times come around. On to point 2 in your blog, Warwick. Point 2 is try to understand their points of view. So not just sit intransigent in your point of view, think their point of view is terrible, but try to understand their point of view. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So it does start with not judging their motives of other people you disagree with. But then I think it's often helpful, understand their points of view, understand why they believe what they believe. Often it will be related to their background, how they grew up, their life experiences. Understand their truth, their perspective. Now, it may not necessarily change your perspective, although it might alter it somewhat. Don't be afraid to have new information or new perspectives that might alter. It's typically, it won't radically change your point of view, although it could, but don't be afraid of that. But at the very least, even if it doesn't change your perspective, it will help you understand why they believe what they believe. Now, you still might feel they're wrong, but you can say at least their perspective is wrong, but it will help you understand. And if you understand somebody's perspective and their beliefs, it makes it a lot harder to demonize them and think of them as awful, evil people. So one of the goals, which is our goal, is to have constructive conversations with people who you may disagree with and to preserve the relationship, as we just spoke about. One very helpful key is if you understand who they are as humans, understand why they believe what they believe, just understand their backgrounds and way of thinking in general, then it cannot help but build empathy, bridges of communication, bridges of respect. And, it's harder to demonize somebody that you respect and that you understand better. So it's a very helpful, I think it's right in of itself to understand people who are friends, family members, co-workers, but there's also a very practical aspect. If you understand somebody, it's really hard to hate them or demonize them. It makes it very hard to do that.
Right. And the third point in your blog follows directly from that, right? If the first point is don't judge the motives of those you disagree with, if the second point is try to understand their point of view, the third point follows logically and naturally. And that is have constructive conversations with them. You touched on that a little bit in your last answer, but talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So, you've got to the point, hopefully, where you're not judging their motives. You understand more about their background and their points of view. And at that point, it's easier to have a real exchange of ideas. Help me understand why you support this candidate. Help me understand why you believe that these policies are the right way to go, and without trying to have a gotcha moment, say, aha, I've got you. I've proved you wrong. Right. I'm just waiting to hammer you for your stupidity in believing what you believe and supporting who you believe. It can't be, it can't be fake constructive conversations or fake exchange of ideas. That'll just make the other person really angry and it will accomplish nothing. So, it's got to be real, not some game, to win some debating point. But just try to understand their perspectives and have a real exchange of ideas. Like, I hear what you're saying, but what about this? And I think that, and what's your thought? And if you built a bridge of trust, then hopefully they will respond in kind. It's not a guarantee. They might still throw out invective and yell and scream and all that. But if you build a situation where there's trust and you feel like you're actually genuinely trying to understand them, there is a chance, maybe a reasonable chance, that they will listen to you and you can have a good exchange of ideas and you might learn something. Even if it doesn't alter your perspective, you will learn how and why people think the way they do, because you'll have had a conversation with that person and maybe with others. It will greatly help your learning, and maybe you can communicate that to other people on your side, whatever that is, to help other people not demonize the opposition, if you will. Right. There can be a multiplication effect in a positive way, where by you sharing what you're learning from the other side, it might be like, gosh, there may be more of us that aren't demonizing the other people as enemies. So, it can have a multiplying effect that helps society. So constructive dialogue, if you've done the inner work, as we often say, don't demonize the other person, try to understand them. At that point, you've got a shot of having a constructive conversation.
Yeah. I think this may be the most important point in the blog, because you emphasize, and you just said it, constructive dialogue, not invective monologue. Too much of our interactions with folks with whom we disagree is us wanting to talk to them about why we're right, not listen to them and understand them. And to have a conversation and a dialogue requires turning on these things, your ears, and lowering the speed of this thing, your mouth, right? Listen. A good model I try to use sometimes with someone where conversations could get touchy is listen twice as much as I speak, because they're not, if they know me at all, they're not going to be surprised by what I believe. So talking as much as them or twice as much as them, or trying to, or listening only to refute their points, isn't anything that's going to surprise them. What might surprise them, what might and will certainly cool the temperature in the room when you're having this conversation is, for me, listen twice as much as I speak. That is has proven to be very beneficial for many years for me.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Gary, because if you're listening twice as much as you speak, or somewhere along that spectrum, you're showing the other person that you're actually really trying to understand them. If all you do is talk and they utter 2 words and then you just interrupt them, that is a very graphical demonstration that you could care less about their perspective. And it's all about winning them or beating them, dominating them, foisting your ideas on them. So, it's never helpful to do that. So, that's a good word. Try to listen more than we're speaking in these constructive conversations.
Yeah. The 4th point in your blog is this: respect those who differ from your perspective. And that's a big one. And that's one that we talk a lot here about soul work, internal work. That's something that has to happen internally. You're in control, right? We are in control of whether we respect or don't respect those with whom we interact. So talk about why that's so important for what you're talking about here in this blog.
Having conversations with people where you actually respect them says you might still believe that your truth is truth in some absolute sense, but you have to respect other people's right to believe what they want to believe, and you have to respect them as humans. You've got to respect who they are, how they're created, what they believe. You have to do that. You've got to, try to understand where their worldview comes from, their backstory, their life story. Try to understand them as real humans with hopes, dreams, disappointments, crucibles, lives of significance that they want to accomplish. There's all sorts of things that goes into the package of a person being human. So you might disagree with their policy perspectives or their viewpoints, but try to respect them as people and their right to believe differently than you do. So you've got to just make this leap of faith, if you will. You've got to respect their right to believe what they believe, and you've got to respect them as human beings.
Right.
I mean, from my faith perspective, we as humans are created by God in God's image. So from my faith perspective, other people, regardless of their perspectives, are worthy of respect.
Yeah. What you just said there earlier here was, it reminded me of this famous quote. Either Patrick Henry said it or Voltaire said it. Depends on who you want to believe, but it says, and I just looked it up here on my phone. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That's a pretty good perspective to have when you have disagreements, right? They have a right to their opinion, whether it's our opinion or not. And Patrick Henry and or Voltaire said that very thing. I could not disagree more with what you say, but I will defend to death your right to say it. That's a pretty bold and pretty important perspective to have when you're disagreeing with somebody, right?
It sure is. Basically, that's the essence of democracy, or it should be. We might have differing opinions, but I will defend to my utmost ability your right to have that differing perspectives and to be able to talk about it in the public square with friends and neighbors. That really is democracy, rather than trying to squelch people's perspectives. And democracy is being willing to let people of different perspectives speak and defending their right to have those opinions. Any healthy democracy, that's what it's about. Totalitarian regimes where only one opinion is allowed and others are squelched. Irrespective of whether you think that opinion is right or wrong, it's not as important as democracies only thrive when differing opinions are allowed to be spoken. And that happens when you respect others' opinions. If you don't respect them, then you can go down the road of others' opinions who are different than mine need to be squelched because they're wrong. And anybody that believes in them is somehow evil, wrong-headed, unintelligent. That viewpoint can have practical consequences.
Yeah. Another quote by a far less famous person is, what's good for democracy is good for relationships. And that was me. I just made that up as you were talking. But that's true, right? What's good for democracy as a whole is good for relationships individually. And I think that is a critical point of what we're talking about here. Yep. The fifth point of your blog, Warwick, is share your backstory behind your worldview. That one's interesting. We don't think about that a lot. We think about always moving forward when we're having a disagreement about something we care passionately about. We don't back up a little bit to explain who we are and why we came to that. Why is that critical?
Yeah, so we spoke about trying to understand other people's perspective and their background. It's important for other people to understand why you believe what you believe. Explain your worldview. Explain what led you to believe what you do. Because if others with differing opinions and differing views understand your background of why, you believe what you believe, that may not necessarily bring them over to your side. It could, but that shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be to build bridges of understanding and respect. So it's important for you to understand their perspective, but you don't want to be thinking, oh, well, my story doesn't matter. My story hasn't influenced my opinion. It's just truth, and therefore I'm just going to tell you what truth is. Well, no, in reality is typically our backstory, people that we've grown up with, parents, teachers, friends, co-workers, it typically does shape and influence our worldview. That will be normal and natural. And so, yeah, just being willing to share authentically, vulnerably who you are. We talk a lot about authenticity and vulnerability for a purpose. Well, to create constructive dialogue means you might want to share how you've been hurt or damaged, for instance. And very often on Beyond the Crucible, the visions we have for a life of significance, a life on purpose dedicated to serving others, they often come out of our worst day, out of our crucibles. So our viewpoint, our mission, our visions often, at least in our world at Beyond the Crucible, often come from our worst day and are influenced by our upbringing. That's not wrong. It just is. So be willing to be open, to be vulnerable, to be authentic about why you believe what you believe and what are some of the forces and backstory that have shaped who you are and how you see the world.
Yeah. And going back to the point that we made earlier about, right, in an us versus them situation, we're both us and them, right? We're us to us and we're them to them. When people do that with you, when people share their backstory with you, be respectful of that. Use that to understand where they're coming from, just as you hope they hear what you're saying to understand where you're coming from. That, again, ratchets up the ability to have peaceful coexistence, even peaceful disagreement. And that's really the goal of what we're trying to do here, right? All right, let's move on to the sixth point in the blog. And that is this: seek first to find common ground. Notice what it didn't say there. Seek first to tear the other one's argument down. Seek first to marshal your best point. Seek first to make sure they be quiet and let you have your say, right? No, it's seek first to find common ground. And find is an important word. Find is something that's more exploratory. It's not declaratory. You're looking for it. So unpack that a little bit more, Warwick. Why is it so important to find common ground?
Yeah, I like the image you mentioned. You don't want to sort of blindfold somebody, put them in a box and put a gag around their mouth so they'll never be seen or heard again and they can't talk. And then who cares what they say because, they'll be in a box. But yeah, I mean, it's important to try to find common ground. It's fine to have different philosophies and perspectives. But the reality is to get anything done in life, in politics, government, business, there will need to be an exchange of ideas and a genuine seeking to find common ground to move forward. What's the point of yelling at each other and, thinking the worst of each other, demonizing them, not respecting them, not trying to understand them? Yes, A, it's wrong, but B, absolutely nothing will get done. And so irrespective of whether your viewpoint's right or the other person's viewpoint is right, nothing's going to get done. So that makes everybody unhappy. I mean, what is the point of that? It makes no sense. So I think it's important it doesn't necessarily mean abandoning your principles or your deeply held values and beliefs. But okay, we might have different values and beliefs, but is there a common ground that we can find in which we can compromise in the good sense of that word, where we get something done in our nation, in our neighborhood, in our family, in our business, that moves things forward? So there can be, principled discussion where you really can seek to find common ground, but you won't want to seek to find common ground unless you've got to a point where you're not demonizing them. You respect them as individuals. They've heard you. You've heard them. You understand their background. They understand your background. All of this is the building blocks to get to a point where you actually find it possible to seek common ground.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we go on to point 7, folks, let's revisit the first 6 points. And I'm going to do it with this caveat. As I say all of these first 6 points, holster, right? In actual conversations with people, in actual relationships with people, when you think about these first 6 points, holster your yeah buts, right? I'm going to say each of the 6 points that started the blog that Warwick wrote, and each one could be responded to by you with a strong opinion. Yeah, but what about? Holster that. Because that will, if you don't holster that, we're not going to get to the place that Warwick is exhorting us to. So here's point 1 from the blog. Don't judge the motives of people we disagree with. right? And I'll just use the yeah, but example. Yeah, but don't go there. Don't judge the motives of people we disagree with. The second point, try to understand their points of view. The third point, have constructive conversations with them. Conversation is the key word in that. Fourth, respect those who differ from our perspective. Fifth, share your backstory behind your worldview. And six, seek to find common ground. And in all of those, keep the yeah buts in your pocket. All right, on to point 7, Warwick. The final point, the wrap-up point here is have as a goal of the conversation to build mutual respect rather than trying to win them over with your viewpoint. I didn't make the connection, but that's the time to holster your, yeah, but here's why I'm right, right? Have as the goal of the conversation to build respect rather than trying to win them over to your viewpoint. Why is that both a great point and a great point to end your blog and our discussion of this important issue?
If ever there was a point at which somebody's going to say, yeah, but,
right.
This is the ultimate, the Mount Everest of yeah, buts. It's
Indeed it is.
But you don't understand, this issue is so important. The fate of our nation, the fate of the world, the fate of the planet as we know it depends on this. So, no, I'm not going to find mutual respect. And of course I have to win them over to my viewpoint, because if I don't, our planet, our way of life will cease to exist. I mean, we can really, get hyperbolic on our perspectives. And even if it's true objectively, and how does one know if it's objectively true? But even if it's true that our viewpoint is quote unquote right and our planet will cease to exist if everybody doesn't agree with us. I mean, yelling and screaming at them, not showing them respect, it's not really going to win them to our point of view. So it's really a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that it's not going to work. So the important point here is have as the goal of our conversation to build respect rather than try to win them over to our viewpoint. Seek to win a friend, not an argument.
Say that again, because that's really important. Say that again. That's a good one. Say that again.
Seek to win a friend, not an argument. Now, for many people, like, whoa. No, I want to win the argument. Really? Is that really what you want your values and beliefs to be about? I don't really care about people. It's just about winning and proving myself right. And besides, what I believe is absolute truth anyway. Is that if everybody conducted themselves that way, we would have a very divided, miserable society, sort of like a society of a desert rather than a fertile field or oasis. So you've got to just put your stake in the ground and say, when we have this conversation, which I'm going to try and make constructive, my goal is not to win them to my point of view. My goal is not to win them to the truth as I see it. My goal is to build respect, to have a constructive conversation. My goal isn't to prove I'm right and they're wrong. I just want to be able to show them that I respect them. And hopefully they'll respect me, but my goal is to show them I'll respect them. I will listen to them. I want to hear their perspective, and I want to learn. I'm trying to build a friendship, a constructive conversation. I'm not trying to win an argument. You just got to, almost like kind of graphically kind of open your hands. Right. And if you will say, okay, I'm not here to try to prove myself right. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to have a constructive conversation.
Yeah. Before we started this recording, Warwick, you asked me, what is the, if you're watching on YouTube, folks, I'm wearing a lapel pin as I often do. You asked me what that pin was, and I didn't tell you. I'm like, I'm going to talk about it in the show. This pin is a pin I bought in Israel, and it has the word shalom on it in both English and Hebrew. And shalom is the Hebrew word, and what its meaning is instructive for this conversation, because it means it's a greeting and it's a form of saying, see you later as well. So it's a greeting and an ending of a conversation. But it's also the word for peace. And for me, what we're talking about here is that very thing. If the way that we greet people is in peace, the way that we part with people is in peace, if we find shalom in those situations, I think that negates what we started talking about in the beginning, the divisiveness that is so rampant in our culture, doesn't it?
That's such a great example. In churches that have a tradition of liturgy, there's a saying we say, which is, peace be with you. And then you say back to them, and also with you. Wouldn't it be kind of amazing if we lived in a society where we said to each other, peace be with you, and also with you? Behind that, what that says is, I respect you. And the other person says, and I respect you too. Or at least that's part of that. May we have a peaceful, constructive conversation, because maybe that'll move things forward. I mean, your goal isn't I'm not sure your goal is even that. Your goal is to just have a constructive conversation and a friendship. Now, a byproduct might be you might find common ground, move things forward that will help society. That's not the goal. It could be a byproduct. But yeah, I like that idea of shalom and just what we say in church in many traditions of peace be with you and also with you. That'd be a great way to start a conversation and end a conversation with somebody who has a different perspective than you do.
Absolutely. All right. So we have arrived at the end of the 7 points. Again, folks, you can read the blog at beyondthecrucible.com. It is titled Focus on Winning a Friend Rather Than an Argument. All these points are laid out with some details as well. Many that we talked about here, but some that we haven't touched on quite as much. So give that a read over at beyondthecrucible.com. And as we always do when we end these episodes, Warwick, I'm going to ask you, what's the one truth, the one truly important thing that folks can do that you'd like to leave for listeners and viewers from this conversation?
Don't assume just because somebody doesn't believe what you believe and may not vote the way you wish they had voted, that they're awful, evil people. Don't make assumptions about people's motives and intent. Try to build bridges of respect, of mutual understanding, of common ground. Be vulnerable with them about your background. Try to understand why they believe what they believe. In the society we live in, we will often be surrounded by people, family, friends, coworkers, who we may strongly disagree with. It's unavoidable. Try as we might, it's very difficult to be in a bubble where we're only with people that agree with us. At the very least, if you have family, you are going to find somewhat likely that at least some of your family, some of your friends, some of the people you work with just have differing perspectives. Now, we might think it's incredulous. How could they believe what they believe? Don't they read the papers? Aren't they informed? Oh, I guess they're reading the wrong information. They're reading the biased stuff. Okay, if they only read the truth, they would know what it is. We can get we get siloed into our own information sources. So I think what we have to ask ourselves is being right more important than the relationship? The right answer at Beyond the Crucible is we believe that the relationship is more important. So, and it might be that our perspective is just that one perspective. There might be other valid perspectives. And we might believe it's true, but be willing to learn and grow and evolve and maybe even change your opinion. So, we really need to separate our perspectives and our opinions from people. It's fine to have strong opinions, but I think it's wrong, frankly, to demonize other people, to malign their motives, think of them as evil, and malign and distrust their intent. That is not right. It will not help build a just and caring and loving society. It will just drive people into their corners, create more division and more harm, nothing will get done, and only damage and distrust and destruction can come from demonizing other people. Is that the world that you want to live in? Is that the world we want to live in? I'd like to think not.
It's so interesting, Warwick, that you use the phrase drive people into their corners. Because what happens in a boxing match, right? They get in the middle of the ring and they fight, they punch, and then they go to their corners, right? They go to their corners so they can get, rested so they can come out and fight again. And putting people in their corners is not the way that we should deal with relationship and dialogue and discussion. We should be in the ring, but the ring should be a table where we have a conversation. And again, I'm going to say it again, folks, remember this over Thanksgiving and Christmas. Play this episode back, read the blog, put it in your pocket when you go to Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas dinner with your family, because this is where a lot of this stuff can happen. As we always do with these episodes, we're going to end with 3 points of reflection that Warwick wrote in the blog for you to think about. Because there's a lot to think about here, but these are 3 points that you can really dive in on and think about. And as always, we urge you, don't just think about them and then, go on and watch the basketball game. Think about, or I'm sorry, the cricket match.
Yeah.
Think about them and, write some notes out about them, journal about them, do some deep thinking here, do some, as we say, soul work on these reflection questions. Here they are. First one, who do you feel led to meet with whose opinions are different from your own? Very interesting. List some people's names. I'm sure right as I said that, some names popped into your head. Write them down, and then follow up. Because the second point is this: what will you do to try to have a constructive conversation with them so that there is a genuine exchanging of ideas, a dialogue that enriches both of you? Warwick just challenged you to something that is not easy to do, but as hopefully has come through in our conversation here, very, very worthwhile to do. And then the third point of reflection is this: have as your goal a conversation that seeks to build trust and mutual understanding rather than to win them over to your viewpoint. And that, folks, will bring to a conclusion the planes on the ground, as I like to say, on this episode of Beyond the Crucible. We do hope that we say a lot that we're dealers in hope. We do hope that this has dealt you some hope as you really do the soul work, again, the inner work, to see where you fall on some of the things that we talked about here, and we encourage you, we exhort you to follow some of the things that are in here so that you can have more peaceable relationships and better conversations. Doesn't cause you to give up doesn't cause you to abandon your values, but it causes you to live in a way, as Abraham Lincoln would say, that leans into the better angels of our nations. Until the next time we meet, folks, remember, we understand that your crucible experiences are difficult. They're hard. Warwick and I both have talked about it a lot, our own crucible experiences on this show. But we've also talked even more so on this show about if we learn the lesson from our crucibles and we apply those lessons, it's not the end of our story. It's the beginning of a new story that leads to the best end we could ever get to, and that is to a life of significance. Welcome to a journey of transformation with the Beyond the Crucible assessment. Unlike any other, this tool is designed to guide you from adversity to achievement. As you answer a few insightful questions, you won't just find a label like the helper or the individualist. Instead, you'll uncover your unique position in the journey of resilience. This assessment reveals where you stand today, the direction you should aim for, and crucially, the steps to get there. It's more than an assessment. It's a roadmap to a life of significance. Ready? Visit beyondthecrucible.com. Take the free assessment and start charting your course to a life of significance today.